Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today we're going to be covering a breaking story, which is that China is basically positing itself as a savior of the world. And of course, who better to talk about China than Arsalan? Assalamu alaikum, Arsalan.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, brother. You're too
As
kind.
a savior of the world. And of course, who better I think there's another video. We need is that you? Oh, you turned it off. Okay, great. Okay, so just a quick thing on this. I'm just going to be sharing screens. Where is the screen I need to share? Here we go. Right, you should see that right now. You should see this article. Okay, so this particular article, I was just going through this earlier, and it's about China backs comprehensive review of pandemic, and about China basically saying they don't mind some sort of inquiry, which is supposedly a great concession, and also that they're going to be donating 2 billion to the United Nations to fight this pandemic. So that looks like, it's a great action by a great moral authority, saving the world, $2 billion, right? And also being very open and transparent. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, the United States, I forget the figure now. I think it was somewhere, I think it was above 100 billion. I don't want to say the exact sum now, but they were donating, hundreds of billions of dollars towards the World Health Organization every year, pretty much. And China was donating something around 5 billion every year. So this billion is nothing.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, it was about 700 something million was America, and China was dwarfed. It was nothing. It was it was less than 100 million, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, but also something I was thinking about is 2 billion is peanuts compared to the economic damage that's done all across the world.
Number two, why they want to let them in? They're going to be able to let them in once they destroyed everything. Reports are coming out on various media, especially those on the outside, talking about how China is destroying all the information, paperwork, and how they had destroyed the virus in some labs, all these things. So they'll only let these people in once they've clean their home. You only let your guests in once you've settled the kids and cleaned your house and all this. This always happens. China will not let anyone in. Same thing with concentration camps. Yeah. Once they put on a stage, so they get rid of these documents. They keep quiet, the doctors. So eventually, what will happen is, and again, I'm going to use this Uyghur issue. What will happen is, when an Uyghur is being interviewed by foreign journalists, you have a foreign journalist or foreign investigator, someone from the UN, come, sit in a room, have a camera, take notes.
Yep.
Right next to them, a whole team of CCP officials doing the same thing to make sure that that person does not say anything against them.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen? The UN is going to take that person and they're going to leave together on a plane? No way, that person is going to be punished if he says one thing wrong. This is clearly documented. Someone with just a little bit of knowledge about China, follow people like Sir Pencer or Laowei 69, I believe, China Uncensored. I mean, they are biased, but they give you evidence. They give you evidence for this.
Yeah.
And so don't buy into it.
Yeah. What's funny is just recently, I want to bring this up. There was a Pakistani scientist who basically spoke about China's greatness in dealing with this particular pandemic, and he said a few things which I thought were quite interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and bring up the article, but basically his point was that China has had a great response to this pandemic, right? I mean, what are your thoughts when you hear stuff like, China had this massive lockdown, everybody was listening, it was great, it was fantastic, they stopped it in its tracks. Even in the early days, Trump was also praising them. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, for we went through this thoroughly, I think, during our first show. So I urge your viewers to watch that. But we know that cases started around mid-November and even the latest, like the last week of November. Okay, there were a few cases going on, and it wasn't actually linked to that wet market. Number two, the doctors who saw to these cases automatically named it a second tier or second phase of SARS, and this is clearly documented. And it was spread amongst like the doctor community, and they were silenced pretty much, especially towards the end of December, going into the beginning of January. And so you've got, let's just say the latest first week of December. Yep. Then they let these people go out onto Chinese New Year, the biggest hijrah or the biggest migration in the human fabric every year. Okay, you got these people going all around the world, and even within China. All right, they were able to travel. So no, if they really were, if they really had it under control, they would have taken care of it in about a month, and officials knew about it, and they would have stopped. They would have quarantined, or they would have blocked off Wuhan, and not let that city or even the whole province Hubei for Chinese New Year. They would have done that, but they didn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely going over some of their major sort of blunders right in the beginning, which screwed things up. But I also wanted, Arsalan, you pretty much live on Twitter and live on this news. So I wanted your thoughts that a lot of people are confused. So say somebody here, and we have a lot of people watching online right now, they happen to go across to websites like the Global Times, and you'll have these articles about how people need to cooperate. This isn't the time to, attack each other. The world, we can do an investigation once things are over. But right now, it's just about cooperation. And not only would you get this in things like the Global Times, you'll also get the Washington Times, the New York Times. You'll have the Guardian. You'll have these things like China Watch, which will basically argue the same thing. So what are your thoughts on this type of information that's coming out, that people like you and the job that you're doing, this is actually not helpful right now because we're trying to save lives and we're trying to cooperate?
Well, at the beginning, China wasn't acting this way. Now they're only doubling down. What's very strange is and I don't really pick sides in the political framework, but the media on the left and the CCP seem to be talking the same language.
Yeah.
So people need to stop being confused. Like they'll see a name like Global Times, or they'll see CGTN, and they'll think it's a reputable news source. They go, this notion that, well, it was on the internet, so it must be true. No, you have to know they have 10, 20 different names, like Global Times, CGTN, People Day, China Daily, all these news, but they are all pro-CCP. You will not hear a smidgen of anything against the government. So anything coming out of here is all pro, worshipping, praising Xi Jinping and China for its efforts. It's true, technically, if China from the get-go, wasn't attacking, and blaming others, it could have been, let's work together. We are all human beings. But China, we can clearly see this. They are not. They don't have good intentions when using this. Normally, you would go, okay, let's accept it. But no, China is politicizing this issue. They're going back. Don't attack us. We're just doing our best. We're in the same boat as you. But they are not genuine. They don't have good intentions, and I'll give you a proof why they don't have good intentions. At the beginning of this, the Chinese virus.
Mm-hmm.
Many nations, including the United States, Australia, all Europe, Italy especially, were sending PPEs, were sending medical supplies, were sending face masks to China. Okay, then what happened when Italy and America and Australia had all these issues? All right, now China, okay, they go, China, help us. China wants to help them. What happens? One, they're selling back. Okay, we'll help you, but you're going to have to buy it from us. And number two, we'll only sell it to you if you praise us. All right, make sure, and we saw this with a couple of European nations, I believe it was Poland, where the guy he kissed the Chinese flag.
Yeah.
So whenever China looks like they're doing good or giving you something, it's not done for no reason. There's always something behind it. They want something. They want you to praise them. They want you to call them up. Oh, thank you, China. If it wasn't for you, astaghfirullah, if it wasn't for you, we would be in a diet. They need that, and they use that. For their own propaganda. What happened to the Africans? The Africans that were living in China, they were being beaten, and that this virus came from them, and that they brought Ebola with them. They were attacked. Those videos went viral. A couple of African diplomats talked back against it. And what happened? The CCP officials or the government workers went and visited the Africans, gifting them, but they brought cameras with them, saying, "Can you praise us now? Come on, like further up. You need to praise us so we can use this." Like there's nothing genuine about it. It's all for show. It's all for face. There's nothing genuine about. You could be dying and they're not going to care. They're always trying to find a buck. They're always there's always something behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very important here to speak about the racism, because China has been using the race card to dampen the criticism of the CCP regime. And in Italy, as you probably know, just before the things got really bad, just to show that Italians were not racist, and this is where the left really fails. They had these social experiments where you hug a Chinese person to show, oh, they're not dangerous, right? And just after that, they had a massive breakout. I shouldn't really laugh, but I mean, it's funny that China is using the race card and saying, don't be racist, when what we're basically calling for, we're not calling for, violence against Chinese or Chinese people, or we're simply saying this communist government, which was not elected, which doesn't even represent the interests of the Chinese people at large, this government should not be allowed to use the race card. And about this particular Africans issue, I was really shocked because, as you know, many of the channels that speak about the racism that the Africans have faced, they actually started highlighting racism against Black people in China is far deeper and far beyond the coronavirus. Yeah. In fact, there was an advert in which there is a Black person and, he's filthy, and then he's trying to kiss this Chinese woman, and she grabs him and she puts him in the washing machine. I mean, you would think, oh my God, this is like a joke or something. It's not, it's actually an advert. And you have situations where Africans are thrown out or because they supposedly have, the virus, and all of this type of racist behavior is even taking place in American capitalistic companies at McDonald's, with science basically saying Black people shouldn't come here. So, it's ironic, and we should not let the Chinese government basically use the race card, especially because of its track record. Again,
with regards to this point as well, the Chinese media, as well as the media on the left, are projecting the same message. What these two groups need to know. So there are two groups, say, in the West, okay? You've got racist bigots and like really politically correct people. Both these people actually agree upon one thing. These people think that criticizing the Chinese Communist Party is exactly the same as criticizing Chinese people. They're two different things, okay? I'm going to go out here and say, Chinese virus or CCP virus, because the culprit of the virus spread is the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese virus just means geographically it came from China. It doesn't mean we're going to blame Chinese people. People need to realize this. If you criticize a government, for example, if you criticize the Iraqi government, doesn't mean you are criticizing Iraqis. If you are criticizing Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian regime, you are not criticizing Syrians. This is the same thing, but because people are not, people are really, they are too afraid to be racist, or we live in a super politically correct world where it's just driven by the left. I'm sounding like a right-wing person, but I'm not. Just the truth, subhanAllah. So these people, you've got to get it right. Government, people, two different.
No, absolutely. And Arsalan, something which is funny is the people who have the right opinion of China, they sadly are actually coming from the right side of the spectrum. So Trump supporters, Brexiteers, Sky News Australia. In fact, Sky News Australia has been putting out some really good news on China. And also that, for us to simply say, let's have an independent investigation, they're being threatened with, tariffs, and they're being threatened with these types of things. So this is not the way for a responsible supposed superpower to act. What I've been really surprised at is the infiltration of the Chinese narrative within America, within Europe, coming from supposedly mainstream European secular liberals saying the same thing. And that's what's so dangerous about this. And it's an ironic time that Muslims basically have to side with the right to basically be on the right side of what's going on with China. I do think, however, things are going to change. Now, we're obviously speaking about the issue with China, and the elephant in the room is the Uyghur issue, the Uyghur issue. Why is it important to use this opportunity to basically criticize the way that the Uyghurs have been treated using the coronavirus pandemic? Why are we taking this opportunity?
I'm sure you've heard of the term "hit them while they're down."
Yeah.
Now, at a time for those that followed me, for the past few years, they know that we have been saying this oppression will eventually get to your doorstep, and subhanAllah, it kind of has.
Yes.
And you guys can kind of look at previous videos about that. That now is a time while this is China at its weakest. Okay, like the dragon or the tiger, how you want to describe it. It's at its weak point. Even though other countries are also weak, we got to get them while they're down. Or half down. Otherwise, when these guys pop back up, these guys are going to be unstoppable economically. Even right now, they are set to profit more than any other country during this pandemic, because businesses are going out of business and China is buying them up. So we really got to be woke when dealing with China at this point, and don't buy into Chinese lies. And again, we're living in this ultra politically correct world that they want to be, people in general, the media and others, they want to be really far from racism and all this and setting a bad name. But you got to speak the truth. And no one's talking about the coronavirus and how it's gonna affect the Uyghurs in these forced labor camps, in these concentration camps. We had a detainee on, and we're talking about how filthy these camps are, and such a disease would kill. It's killed 80,000 in the United States.
Yeah.
And with all the measures that they put in, I imagine the camps that's gonna fly by.
And I was actually thinking about something. I just wanted your thoughts on it. I don't think it's a wild theory. I think it's very plausible, which is that for China, and what's unique about China as an academic, Christina Fair has said that it's the only country where its engineers, its doctors, its professionals are disposable. So if they're going to a region where engineers get killed, they'll keep sending more because they have enough people. If you look at the coronavirus, it's not going to have any major impact on the Chinese population. In fact, the Chinese government may say, well, that's kind of good. We were kind of overpopulating, so let's just deal with that. Secondly, China is known and is documented, and there's actually evidence of this, which is indisputable, that it has a one-child policy, and people, including Han Chinese people who had 2 children, the Chinese government first forced them to have abortions, and then when it realized that it was profitable to actually let the woman give birth and then against her will take the child and put it under adoption, a government that thinks on this level, that thinks on a purely Machiavellian level, it's not far-fetched for us to think that actually this government, with this particular coronavirus, they're just going to deal with the people that died, and they're just going to use this as an opportunity to posit themselves as the new global power. And we're already seeing signs of that. How are we seeing signs of that? We're seeing signs from the perspective that they're more aggressive now than they were before. And actually, they have this, I've forgotten the name, but there's an Australian defector. I mean, he's a Chinese communist government defector who ran off to Australia. I've forgotten his name. And he was explaining that Chinese CCP government has this two-pronged strategy. On the one end, they're going to be aggressive. They're going to be, we're going to dominate the world, this. And on the other end, they're going to be like, you must cooperate. You must cooperate. We need to cooperate. We need to be nice to each other. China does not want to rock the boat. We don't want to change the world order. And they push out both messages, right, at the same time. And it's kind of like good cop, bad cop, right? And I feel that the West is to a large extent paralyzed in its response to China because of its tendency for assuming the best, right? It's just like, well, they're an emerging power. They're not going to be that bad. And other people who are trying to raise the alarm, others are basically, there's a lot of infighting happening. Other than, I would say, the Republican Party in North America, I would say most European nations are confused about what to do with China.
Again, China is still like in our minds this exotic, Far East kung fu culture, 1,000 years of history, Great Wall of China. We're still living in this, and when the Chinese do go abroad, okay, they're generally very rich Chinese. That they boost economies. So we are still, unfortunately, much of the population are still blinded. They go, wow, it happened in China, and like they're not to blame. But we don't. People seem to be buying the narrative that, one, people are starting to believe that this virus probably did come from America. They're buying into Chinese media, and that they've just seen these fluffy, cuddly Chinese people just doing their thing. And how can we blame? Again, it's the separation between people and the government, and the government is pure evil. But what China does has successfully brainwashed the world into thinking, because they brainwash their own people into thinking that if Xi Jinping, if the government is attacked, meaning we have been all attacked.
Yeah.
This is what Chinese people think. So, for example, I'm an Australian, right? If my government is attacked, I don't care. Like that doesn't bother me, unless it's a government or something I support. I might write a little bit about how can you, but I'm not going, oh no, you're a traitor. This is treason. And a lot of Middle Eastern countries do the same thing as well as Asian countries. Like, you've attacked my leader, therefore you've attacked me, and that's racist. You've attacked Xi Jinping, so you're attacking all Chinese people. So yeah, people need to stop doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we need to start looking at the internal narrative that's coming out of China, right? The internal narrative is one thing with the Chinese CCP government is terrible at is the fact that it seems to think what it says internally is not going to somehow go out externally when you have over 1 billion people watching. It kind of reminds me of atheists who, they give one narrative on their channel and they give another narrative when they're talking to people of the other faith, right? If you look at the narrative coming from China, the narrative is very anti-Western. It's very aggressive. There's even, you have, when the coronavirus reached Hong Kong and it reached other places, there's celebration. There's actually a restaurant in China which was celebrating this. And so, the internal narrative is kind of like, we had 100 years of basically bad luck, right? And now we're back, right? And it's a very, very aggressive narrative. And they want us to basically accept that they're not going to have any nefarious intentions, which is very hard to believe when you look at the militarization, the brutalization. And one thing which I think you're absolutely correct on is if they can be treating their people the way that they are, imagine how they're going to treat non-Han Chinese. And we've already seen that with the Uyghurs, but imagine how they're going to be treating people when they take over parts of Africa, which I do believe they're going to eventually do. I do believe that they do have these plans. And I cannot disagree with right-wing Americans when they are saying these things about the Chinese, including a lot of Trump supporters who I know very much support your work.
Yeah. So with regard to what the Chinese say internally as towards to externally, all right, I don't want to offend anyone or sound derogatory, but this is Chinese taqiyya. You guys know the term taqiyya? So this is Chinese taqiyya, that like within their own groups, they say one thing, and when they go out, they hide another thing. And you're right, this is not an old style of colonialism where the British or the Americans come and bomb you back to the Stone Age. This is a new form of colonialism, and we can see it where China loans money to second, third world nations. They obviously can't pay them back. And these nations like Zimbabwe, parts of Western Africa, South America, they are and Southeast Asia like Sri Lanka, you know, they're building ports for them. And slowly they can't pay, there's no way for them to pay back, and they're slowly losing their sovereignty. So they use this Chinese money to build roads and infrastructure. They can't pay that back. Now China gets to use those places indefinitely to make money off those, and those countries are losing their sovereignty through this. Yeah. You know, people aren't waiting, and America has realized this, that China is they're literally, just because you're not bombing people doesn't mean that you're not taking over. It's a new it's neo war, for example, this new form of war that, you know, to colonize people. And those African states and Southeast Asian, South American states are going to be the new Xinjiang, the new East Turkestan, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, about this particular issue now, let's move on to the situation in East Turkestan.
Yeah.
What's the latest that you've been getting on the ground over the past couple of days and the last 2 weeks? Because obviously there's been a lot of developments, and I think China's really feeling the pinch in terms of the recent legislation that was also passed.
Okay, what we have been getting, and it's not official yet, but what we have been getting, that they have been clamping down further. They are using because there is hardly any media anymore in East Turkestan, and the world is focused on the virus. So that the Chinese are using that as an excuse to arrest more, to arbitrarily detain more people. That's what we've been hearing. But as regards to the actual numbers and all these things, we don't know how many people died from the virus. We don't know, but more and more people are being arrested. This is what we have been hearing, and the ones that were in the camps have been moved into forced labor towards the Chinese provinces. So now, it's not better.
Yeah, and on Talk to East Turkestan, there's a few things which are, for me at least, were quite new. So one of them was, it wasn't just Chinese officials going up to Muslims and basically telling them don't do this. Even cases of somebody making bread, and just a random Chinese man comes up to a Muslim woman, and then because of what he's threatening her with, which is essentially, you better change your behavior, she takes off her headscarf. I saw an old woman do this, and you know, so it's almost like the citizens, the Han Chinese citizens of East Turkestan, who've infiltrated, who have been planted there, they act as the police. Or are these rare instances, or is it really the case that they now start to act like the government officials?
Well, the thing is, right, the policies are fully supportive of the Chinese. They have been given the green light to basically do whatever they want. So imagine you get to just rock up to women and treat them that way, you know. Let me have a look at you, take off your hair, you know, like, so they have been given the green light. And even if that's a crime, but even if they were to report, the Uyghur would be, punished. Why did you report this Chinese man? Why have you wasted our time? So no one would dare to report against that. And and even imagine, right? You live with no deen, or you live with no moral compass. Okay, first of all, there is no law to stop you, and you're doing this to a minority. Okay, the Chinese call it a minority, and you know that person, if he were to speak up against you, you're just going to go to the police. Oh, how dare she? It's sort of like apartheid South Africa. Yeah, can you imagine back then, like South Africa, like African man, complaining to about a white man, and what would happen? So that's what's happening right now. Straight up racism, and they get away with so much. Even normal everyday citizens, the ones that are voluntarily going to East Turkestan, and they know that if those policies did not exist, they know if the Red Army did not exist in East Turkestan, they could not spend one day safely there. They are only able to live because of the heavy military presence and the genocidal policies against the Uyghurs.
Yeah, definitely. And I've even seen ads, self-made ads, where Chinese people are basically Han Chinese people are basically telling others, look how good it is in East Turkestan. You'll get this, you'll get this. So it's like an internal type of advertisement that, look at this. This is ripe land. You can come here. They'll give you land. They'll give you this, or whatever it is. I don't remember exactly what the person's saying in the video, but they're encouraging each other to invade.
Actually, those people, and I'm sure some of them are not paid, but most of them are actually glorified 50-cent trolls. So the trolls that we see on comments, some of them have actually moved up a level and actually talk on camera. And a report by Radio Free Asia talked about this. They actually spoke to one of the women that did those videos calling the Chinese to visit. And she said, well, I get paid by the government to do this. So we have evidence that these people are actually paid to make it look like they're just normal citizens. And imagine you didn't have deen, or you didn't have a moral compass, and these policies were in place. Wallahi, we'd be doing the same thing if we didn't have a moral compass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the brazen way that an entire country, I mean, I just want to go back to one part here, which I think is very important. I put this on Twitter, and I think it's important for everyone to see. It's just going to come up. That is East Turkestan, right? Yeah. And that's what I want everybody to understand here. This is East Turkestan. This is not China, right? I had to basically, because all my life I saw, the map of China, and I just saw that. So when I discovered what was going on, it was really mind-blowing, because that is a huge chunk of China. And in fact, you can call East Turkestan, occupied East Turkestan, the bread basket of China, because of how rich it is in resources, how low it is in population, how close it is to Central Asian countries, which are filled with resources. I mean, this is why they are so brutal, because from there, if they're looking at things from a purely capitalistic perspective, even though they're communists, they're thinking of people as numbers. This region is the reason why China is a world economic power, because I do not see how it could be so without China having access to Central Asia, which has to go through East Turkestan, and the resources, and even now the forced labor that they're using, and they're using the Uyghurs in the same way that the Americans use slaves from Africa to do free work.
Exactly. It's technically, now that it is part of China on paper, it's the largest province in China. It makes up 1/6 of China. So I reside in Turkey, but I'm working somewhere else at the moment. It's 2.5 times the size of Turkey. So it's very land, natural resources, all of our cotton. 80% of China's cotton comes from East Turkestan. So most likely, if you're buying a made in China Adidas Nike shirt, it most likely came from East Turkestan through slave labor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just want to end because I wanted to cover one more topic, which is the recent news that you've been highlighting in the US Senate or whatever it was, where they passed this particular bill and where it's going to go. I mean, somebody playing devil's advocate here, somebody could just turn around and say, well, how significant is that? Because America, at the end of the day, it can't really physically change what's happening in East Turkestan. Why is that important? People pass bills. It's not really heavy. Why were you celebrating, and why are Muslims across the world with a sense of political activism actually celebrating this particular bill?
Well, the thing is, this is actually the second time pretty much the same sort of bill has been passed, but it didn't really get into law the first time round. This is important because the first time this bill was passed, China really lost it. China, it affected China because normally China, and you can go back and if you look to my interviews, just type in my name into YouTube, type in TRT World, and I gave interviews on this matter. They were really, how could they do this to us? And for the first time in a long time, they were really on the back foot. So within the bill, it talks about sanctioning these CCP officials that really led this fight, talking about forced labor. So with this bill, especially with the forced labor issue, these big companies, these conglomerates are going to have to think twice when they invest in China. So this is going to hit them economically. And to be honest, China is running their main money is power. Okay, and if these huge companies are pulling out of China, okay, they're going to lose a lot of face as well. So it's all about face. It's all about the economy, and they're going to slowly lose their handle on this. And once America does that, other countries could also follow suit. And China sees this as the beginning of the end, and we see this as well if it is passed into law. And to be honest, there is no other sort of policy-making, law-changing act going on anywhere else in the world. So this is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I did say that I wanted this to be the last point, but I just remembered something else I wanted you to cover. So you made a recent video in which you were mentioning that when you were on BBC radio and they were asking you about what should be done about China a few months ago, I think sometime last year, and you said basically not having a trade deal with them, basically boycotting them, and the interviewer, who was largely, you can say, sympathetic to your cause, to the Muslim cause, or just generally these issues, even he was like, well, that's kind of unrealistic. And then now that situation, according to you, doesn't seem so unrealistic. So give us that, because that, I think, is quite a big development.
Well, isn't it interesting? Like, there's an English phrase about this. Like, once it hits home, because this wasn't affecting, was only happening to the Uyghurs, or only happening to the Turkic people of Turkestan. But now, once it gets to your front door, so I think that's what happened. As I mentioned, I'm going back to this. If, like, God forbid, this oppression goes to your front door, and now people are locked up, people have lost their jobs, people have had to, for those that are renting, they're living on the streets. It's affecting the United States economy, Western economy. It's affected everyone's pocket eventually. So now they've realized, because now it's gone to their own front door, now they see, you know what? Boycotting China may not be such a bad idea. It is actually possible. What we have been saying for the longest time, and wallahi, yani, if this is not a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't know what is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it reminds me of this verse of the Quran where Allah says, none knows the soldiers of Allah except Allah. Yeah. And a spider can be the soldier of Allah, anything. And the way the world changes, I literally, just a few months ago, it would be unbelievable that we would be having this conversation. We would be seen as lunatics talking about, how China is being going to be one day boycotted by the entire world. There's people calling for an independent investigation. There's going to be a bill passed in America. There's actually going to be full documentaries made by mainstream Western media outlets slating China and basically speaking about its human rights record, its record to do with, covering up the pandemic and causing the deaths. European countries sending bills to China of trillions, right? Think tanks basically saying, you cost us trillions, right? And honestly, what I'm thinking to myself right now is, if you do zulm, if you oppress people, there is no veil between that dua and Allah, the person who's oppressed. And those people who are in those concentration camps, those families who've had their children taken away, they raise their hands, and we know that Allah answered. And honestly, this is a sign for all of us that you don't mess with Allah. You don't mess with Allah. You don't mess with the oppressed people.
Yeah, like in the Quran, Allah is the best of planners. But isn't it sad that it had to come to this? It had to come to people being hospitalized. It had to come to hundreds and thousands of deaths around the world for us to boycott. I mean, and if it wasn't for the virus, that's why I've always said in some of my videos, and some people misunderstand that this virus is a blessing in disguise. But it had to come to this for people to understand that China is a tyrant that affects everybody. That's what's sad about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely did not need to go this far, but we are here. And as we Muslims believe that if we collectively do not fulfill an obligation, then we are collectively sinful. It's fard al-kafaya to help out the oppressed. It's fard al-kafaya to do many things. And when we think about Ramadan and we think about, what we're supposed to be doing in this month, we sometimes are very blind and very binary about what worship is. Worship is not just simply taking the book of Allah, reading it, remembering it, thinking about it. What is the story of the people of the ditch, who the ditch is dug and they're thrown in and they're being burnt alive, and the people, Allah is telling us this story not for us to hear the recitation and not understand it and say, wow, that's a nice sign. Allah is basically saying this should not happen and there is going to be retribution. And that's what we as Muslims should be doing this Ramadan. We should be politically active and we should be doing our utmost. Now, throughout this live session, I've got this question: what can we do? Simple answer, Arsalan. What can people do?
Again, share this video, obviously, but share the news. Also, a lot of your followers, I see, mostly students, especially if you're in university. See if university has ties with Chinese companies or Chinese, especially tech companies, because a lot of the technology used, especially surveillance and AI technology, was used against Uyghurs, and that's how they were caught. Whether it be on their mobile phones. And when I'm in court, they weren't doing anything crazy. They had WhatsApp on their phone or something like this, and how they were arrested and sent to concentration. And if you're a master's or you're doing a PhD, ask something in political science or Chinese studies. Ask your professor if you can write about a thesis about the Uyghur issue. There is so much we can do, especially as youth. And see, petitions and all these things you can do. But I wanted to raise, you sent me a question the other day. Someone was very suspicious, saying, the concentration camps or the Uyghurs are not being persecuted.
Yeah, that was the CCP troll.
And basically what's been happening recently is, but you showed the Global Times, for example, that I believe it was the Global Times or People's Daily, I forget one of them. They released 2 videos of a parent and a sister who were in concentration camps, but they said they were never in concentration camps, and this was basically an answer or a rebuttal to the family who were living on the outside, who were advocating for their family members to make them out to be liars. Now, these people have not spoken to their family members over the phone in 2 to 3 years. So they were online and said, "Where's my father? Where's my sister?" Now, isn't it crazy that they could only see their family members after they had to go online publicly? The question here is not whether those people were ever in concentration camps or not. They were, but how come we can't even pick up a phone and talk to our fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters?
Yeah,
that's the question China has never been able to answer, and no CCP troll can answer this question. Okay, there is no concentration camp. How come we can't call our loved ones then?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing for me which really gets to me more than anything, and I recommend everybody goes to Talk to East Turkestan Facebook, daily updates, at least 2 videos a day, is the videos where children are being taken away from their parents. And being a parent myself, I find that very difficult to watch. Wallahi, it's something which is amongst all the things that you can see, because human beings, we love our children more than anything else, right? And I want everybody to understand that if that was your child, if you were that child and you were taken away from your parents, you would have a sense of urgency, you'd have a sense of anxiety, you've had a sense of this type of passion to get justice. And that is exactly what we need right now. Nothing we can do to China physically is more powerful than going onto social media, tweeting, replying, copying. I'll be very, very frank with you guys. China is a company. That's the way they act. They look at profits. They're a company. Many people who've worked in companies or CEOs of companies, they'll tell you nothing is more frightening than when someone takes your company name and says exposed and says disgruntled employee or this or that or fraud. Nothing hurts your company more than that. And all of you guys who've been very supportive, you guys just need to be louder. Go to Talk to East Turkestan, support the work of Arsalan Hidayat, and make sure that even this video you share it with your followers. Jazakallah khair, Arsalan Hidayat. Just to end upon, what time do you finish your fast today?
So we finished like 6:25ish. So that's iftar. And then for Dhuhr, it's like 3:20 a.m. It's about 14 and a half hours or so.
MashaAllah, that's excellent. And it's not that long. However, I wanted to just highlight, look how accessible and look how easy it is to ask that question. How's your fast going? The Muslims, the millions of Muslims in East Turkestan, they do not have the privilege of opening their fast because they never were able to make it in the first place. And I really want everybody to think about that in iftar time, because sometimes when I'm thinking about the blessings that we have, I honestly just think we're so ungrateful. We're so ungrateful. So Jazakallah khair, Arsalan, for that. And I'll have you on again, inshallah, when a new story breaks. I definitely think you did a thorough job in refuting this nonsense that China is a global carer. It's more like a global culprit. And we're going to keep putting pressure on China, putting pressure on the trolls, putting pressure on these things until the obligation is fulfilled of helping our Muslim brothers and sisters in East Turkestan. Jazakallah khair for your time.
Wa alaikum assalam
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.